Hey, welcome back everybody. So this is more Age of Empires 4, but I wanted to slow things down, so now we're actually at half pace here. And this is going to be a lot of talking, but I wanted to talk through some of the game concepts to kind of serve as an intro for anyone who's wanting to learn more about the game. And if you're not familiar with RTS concepts, then maybe this series of videos will help you out. This one's going to be focused on macro elements of the game. When I say macro, I mean the economic and resource focused parts of the game. So we're going to talk about villagers, we're going to talk about how to gather the 4 different resources, what are ways of improving your efficiency in gathering those resources, and just talk about some of the basics of the game. And I'll try to mention some civilization-specific bonuses or technologies, but I'm going to try to stick to just the general buildings that nearly all civilizations can build and work with. So I'm playing against a computer here on Dry Arabia, and I'm playing as the Holy Roman Empire. At the beginning of the game, there's 2 resources that you really need to focus on. One of them is food, and the other is gold. There's 4 resources total in the game. There's food, wood, gold, and stone. They can be gathered in a variety of ways, but at the beginning of the game, you're focused on food and gold because you need 400 food and 200 gold to make it to the next age. As you age up, new technologies become available, and it's very helpful to stay ahead of your opponent in terms of ages. It's a good indication of whether you're winning or not. And it's just something that'll really get the game to open up. At the beginning in this Age 1, the Dark Age, there's not much to do. So we really want to fast forward through the Dark Age. And it gets harder and harder to age up because the food and gold costs will continue to increase. So we're going to spend barely any time in the Dark Age, decent amount of time in the Feudal Age, probably a pretty long time in the Castle Age, and then the Imperial Age, which is the 4th and final age, that one you'll just stay in indefinitely as the game goes on. So how am I going to get the food and gold that I need to make it to the next age? Well, I'm gathering food from the most easily available food source in the game, sheep. At the beginning of the game, a sheep will spawn near your town center, along with 2 nearby, and you can gather them up and put them near your town center. My villagers, which is your basic economic worker unit, it gathers wood, food, stone, and gold. It builds and repairs buildings. It can repair certain units. Other than that, villagers don't do much of anything. So I have, looks like 7 villagers here gathering food from the sheep carcasses. So I basically moved the sheep as close as I could to my town center, and now we're gathering food from it. To get gold, we're going to be mining it from this gold vein, which always spawns near your base. At the beginning of the game, you'll typically have an available food source, like these berries and sheep. You'll have wood nearby. You'll also have a gold patch, and you'll have a stone patch nearby. Now, unlike food, I mean, these sheep I can pretty much park right next to my town center. The gold, I have to make a resource drop-off building. That's this mining camp. There is a mill, which you can drop food off at specifically. There are mining camps that you can drop gold or stone off at. And there's also a lumber camp, which you build near tree lines to make the drop-off point a lot closer for your villagers. I mean, we could drop all of those resources off here at the town center. The town center serves as your as a resource drop-off point for any resource. We can return food, wood, gold, or stone to this large town center. But as you can see, yeah, we can bring the sheep nearby, but all these other resources, I can't exactly bring the trees closer to my town center. I can't bring the gold closer to my town center, etc. So we're getting our food, we're getting our gold, and we're starting to get some wood. Wood isn't really highly prioritized, but we'll go for it anyway, just to build some more buildings in the near future. Each of these resource drop-off buildings, the lumber camp, the mining camp, and the mill, which I'm eventually going to put over here near these berries, they have technologies on them that you can research. All of them have this very basic technology which increases the gathering rate of whatever resource they're associated with. So here at the mining camp, I can get specialized pick, which increases the rate at which my villagers gather gold and stone. There's double broadaxe here at the lumber camp, which increases the gathering rate of wood by 15%. And there's a similar technology at the mill, which allows me to gather food a little faster. You may see some other upgrades. The lumber camp actually also has forestry, which doubles the rate at which villagers chop down trees. That adds a little bit of efficiency. And the mill actually has a variety of technologies that we'll talk about. So my villagers are gathering resources for me, and it looks like I can improve the gathering rate of different resources. Cool. In reality, all of these different resources, food, wood, gold, and stone, when we gather them, the rate at which we get the resources is affected by a variety of factors. The first is distance. How far are my villagers having to go to gather the resource? If my villagers were gathering berries right now, they'd have to walk all the way to this berry bush and then walk all the way back to the town center. So that distance that they walk is time when they aren't gathering resources, so that is an inefficiency. Another thing that matters is how fast my villagers move. If they have to travel a distance between the location that has the resources and the location where they can drop off the resources, the faster they move back and forth between those 2 points, the better. That's an important consideration because there are technologies that increase the speed of your villagers. There is a technology called wheelbarrow, which allows your villagers to move faster and carry more. In fact, the Holy Roman Empire have a sort of basic wheelbarrow upgrade that gives them a little bit more capacity, so they can carry more things. They don't exactly move faster, though. I have to research the wheelbarrow technology for them to move faster. And that actually segues us into another point, carrying capacity. That's another efficiency. If my villager has to move all the way to this berry bush to gather from it and then drop off the resources at the town center, it'd be great if they could gather up a lot of food, drop it off, and then get back to work. If they could only gather maybe like 5 food from the bush and now their backpack or whatever it is full, now they have to go back and return. So the more a villager can carry, the more they're going to be working at the resource spot. So it's distance from the drop-off point, the speed of the villager, their carrying capacity, and then finally the gather rate, which we kind of discussed briefly. There are these technologies that can increase the gather rate. But there's plenty more complications here. Different civilizations have different gathering bonuses. For example, as the Holy Roman Empire, this prelate of mine, this religious unit, is blessing my villagers, which increases their gather rate of resources for 30 seconds. So it's a little gathering speed buff that this prelate is putting on my villagers. So they're gathering a little quicker. There's also, so we already talked about a civilization-specific gather speed. There's also the inherent resource. So let's say my prelate blessed one of my villagers and they started to gather from these sheep. They've already got an increased gathering rate thanks to the prelate. But oddly enough, if we had put the villager instead on gathering from, let's say, these deer down here, deer are actually easier to gather from than sheep or, say, berries. You get an increased gather speed on deer. You get an even higher gather rate on boar. So there's not only the buffs and technologies that might be on your villagers. For example, maybe my villagers have the horticulture upgrade and they've been blessed by a prelate. They would gather really quickly and even faster if they had done it from a deer, and even faster if they had done it from a boar. So it's not only the buffs that are on them or the civilization specific things or the technologies that they have, it's also what they're gathering from. It really only applies to food. Food is the only one that has kind of this variable gathering rate. Sheep and berries are kind of at the bottom, and then higher up are deer, fish, and boar. So that's something to consider as well. So with all of that combined, the list goes distance from the resource spot, how fast my villagers move, how fast they gather, how much they can carry, and what they're gathering. So keep in mind, if they are, even the best and most buffed villager will gather from sheep a little slower than a villager, the same villager gathering from deer. With that in mind, with all those factors, there's a few things that players do to improve the gather rate for their villagers. One is build lots of lumber camps. Wood is awkward because the more you chop, the farther away your villagers will get. You can see we started it right against the wood line, but now there's actually a little gap and my villagers are having to walk back and forth to drop off this wood. So often players will just build a lumber camp right here. It seems kind of redundant. Yeah, we already have our resource drop-off point, but if we built it a little closer, that's going to improve the speed of all the villagers. So we can bring resource gathering spots, or the drop-off points, closer to the resources, just like with these this wood line. Alternatively, we can bring the resources to us. In this game, I researched professional scouts. My scouts now have the ability to gather animal carcasses and move them. So we're going to hunt these deer and we're going to bring them back to my base. We could have built a mill here in the middle of all these deer and hunted them with villagers, but instead I'm having my scouts gather them up and bring them back to my base, and I'm going to put them right next to my town center, thus reducing the distance that my villagers have to travel. So these deer are going to be a lot better than these sheep that are just hanging out near my town center. So I'm going to have my villagers gather from these deer instead, because the distance will be low, the gather rate will be better because deer are just easier to gather from. So it's definitely going to be a better food resource. There's even a technology here at the mill that improves the hunted meat gather rate. So you could gather even more food. Well, you could gather food faster from these deer carcasses if you have this survival techniques technology researched. Looks like I'm also getting that wheelbarrow technology, which we mentioned, increases the carry capacity of villagers and increases their movement speed. Cool. Now let's talk a little bit more about these upgrades and whether we should get them or not. Early on in the game, you're going to be really hard pressed to gather up gold. Gold is going to be a very valuable resource. And spending it, you have to be very wise about what you spend it on. These resource gathering rate technologies are good, but often the question becomes, do I want to spend 175 gold on this technology or 175 gold on something else? You need 600 gold to make it to the next age. So consider that this upgrade is about a third of the gold you need to make it to the next age. Yes, it's a permanent upgrade. Yes, it'll make all your villagers gather faster. But maybe ask yourself, do I want this specialized pick for 175 gold? It'll improve the gold gathering rate, so eventually it will pay for itself. I'll eventually have gathered up more efficient gold than 175 gold. I'd basically have it pay off the technology's price. But at the higher levels of skill, if you watch professionals play this game or you watch just really skilled players play this, that 175 gold can be spent on so much else. They are going to be, these players are going to be pushing the limits and the efficiencies of all of their units as much as they can. And so they often forego getting these technologies because they take time to pay off. They're not a guaranteed win. And in their mind, they might be able to leverage that 175 gold into something way better. Maybe in their mind, they can spend that 175 gold on 2 knights when they make it to the castle age. And those 2 knights could give them a huge opportunity to deal damage to the opponent. So there's a lot of upside to spending your gold on knights. This technology here, it's kind of the upside and the downside to it are really narrow. Like, it's not amazing, it's not awful, it's a very safe, non-risky technology to get. But you're gonna see most players not go for them, at least for a while. A lot of players will get wheelbarrow because it's just a really nice technology. It makes your villagers faster, which means they have a bit more survivability. They can run away from enemy units faster. And the increased carry capacity is just nice. So often you'll see players get wheelbarrow, and it won't be until later in the game that they start to get these gather rate increases. Again, because while these are safe technologies to research, these highly skilled players would much rather leverage that gold in other ways, making units or getting technologies. Let's talk about another element of the macro game, and that is your housing supply. Right now, my population is 40 out of 40, and it says population full, build more houses to continue. As the game goes on, your units will take up something called supply, and you can only have up to 200 supply of units in a game. To support those units, you need to build houses. All these do is increase your population, so it's just kind of a small infrastructure element that you need to be mindful of. Houses are dirt cheap. They take about 50 wood, and they build very quickly. So as the game goes on, you're going to be building them over and over and over. There you go. There's a nice house finishing up. Town centers actually provide 10 population as well. So if your population blocked, you could also build a town center to get your population supply to go up. Other macro elements to discuss. One is the blacksmith. Here we spend money on technologies that increase the stats, so the damage, the armor of our military units. It's important to get upgrades because it will improve the efficiency of your military units. Much like how these economic technologies improve the efficiency of our villagers, these blacksmith upgrades will increase the efficiency of our military units. Again, early in the game, these technologies are not necessary, and rarely do you see players just get all of these different upgrades right away. You will see players get choosy about which ones they want. For example, here I'm researching Iron Undermesh. That increases the ranged armor of all non-siege units. So that means when arrows or anything ranged hits my units, a little bit of the damage is prevented. 1 damage of the attack is prevented. This technology is often researched early on because a lot of players like to make archers. If I was going up against the English, I would definitely want to get this upgrade. And then I might forego getting these other upgrades until later on in the game. But think about being choosy at first with your upgrades here, and then when your economy starts to really roar, that's when you'll want to research these other technologies. It's also important to get these later on because that's when the army numbers are really massive. Getting a little bit of armor on 11 units is not that amazing. Getting a little bit of armor on 100 units is a huge efficiency increase. So the more military units that are in play, the more important these upgrades are. And you'll often see players get 2 blacksmiths so that they can research these simultaneously. Going back a little bit to the economy side of things, it's good to be ahead of your opponent in villager count, because that means you're going to be gathering more resources. Now, as you can imagine, 20 villagers versus 18 villagers, you'd think 20 villagers would be better, but don't forget all the little efficiencies that are at play. Maybe those 18 villagers have a bunch of these gathering upgrades, and they have wheelbarrow, and they're gathering wood from a wood line that's right next to a lumber camp, while the 20 other villagers have no upgrades and are gathering maybe from a long distance. They have to travel all the way to the wood line and then all the way back to this lumber camp. Now you can see how the 18 villagers might be more efficient than the 20, but in general, the more villagers you have, the better. So you will always want to be producing villagers as the game goes on, and you may want to consider making more town centers, because more town centers means more villager production. To make more town centers, you actually do need to gather up a little bit of stone, which we haven't talked all that much about in terms of resources, but you'll need a little bit of stone and a little bit of wood, and then you can put down another town center and start producing villagers even faster. So you'll win the economic game if you have more villagers and if they are working very efficiently. That's the simple matter of it. There are ways to fix your resource distribution. At the market, you can buy and sell food, lumber, and stone for gold. So the currency of exchange at the market is always gold. I can spend 130 gold to get these different resources, or I could sell these resources to get some kind of amount of gold. You can see that food and wood are fairly inexpensive, while stone is pretty valuable and sells for a pretty high value and is pretty expensive to purchase. The market is helpful because if you have an excess of a resource, you can quickly convert it into another. You're most efficient when you're converting a resource into gold or gold into a resource. It's very difficult to go to the market and say, I want to turn my food into wood. You're going to have to do a very inefficient exchange there, because you're going to have to first turn the food into gold and then buy the wood with gold. So the market is really more about balancing your gold economy. And it's very helpful when you have lots of gold because you can just buy whatever you want. So think of the market as a place to go when you have excess gold or you have excess of a resource and need gold. You can also make these traders. These are workers like villagers, but they don't build anything. All they do is walk back and forth between a trade post or maybe a friendly market, and then they gather up some gold and drop it off at your market. They are not the most efficient of workers. If you think about it, look at the travel distance. Yes, the gather rate is instantaneous. The moment they reach the trade post, they get all the gold that they're going to deliver. But these traders, they have to travel such a long distance and their speed is terrible. So, if you do go traders, try to find ways of increasing their speed, or, well, really, it's the speed that you're worried about. These guys are so slow. Distance you could shorten if you want to build your market like right next to the neutral trade post. You can, but the gold that they return is dependent on the distance from the market. The further away this market is from the trade post, the more gold that these traders will return. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Your best bet is to keep your market a good distance away from the trade post, and then find a way to increase the speed of your traders. In fact, the Mongols have a way of increasing the speed of their traders. They can utilize the Yam network to increase the speed of their traders. So those are some of the economic concepts. There's all sorts of Civ-specific concepts which we can talk about briefly. For this civilization that I'm playing, the Holy Roman Empire, as we mentioned, they come with a sort of basic wheelbarrow upgrade. They have a little bit of extra carry capacity, so all my villagers can carry a little bit more. And they also have these prelates, which inspire your villagers to gather faster. So keeping your villagers inspired is really important as the Holy Roman Empire. You really want to keep these villagers nice and golden. See that little golden glow around them? You can even do that by making this landmark, the Aachen Chapel. These landmarks are what you need to go up to the next age. We spend food and gold to make these buildings. This Aachen Chapel actually inspires all of my villagers who work beneath it. So you can see it's actually blessing all of these villagers with increased gather rate. Very cool. For the Chinese, they can actually supervise their building drop-off locations, and when they do that with their imperial officials, when they supervise a drop-off point, the resources that villagers drop off get increased a little bit. So if an imperial official is watching over a lumber camp and a villager returns 10 wood to that lumber camp, it actually gets increased to 12. The extra resources just kind of appear out of nowhere because the imperial official found them or something. That's something the Chinese can do. The Chinese also have taxes that are generated at their buildings. So think of it as they don't just get gold from these gold veins or their traders. They actually also get gold from buildings. Their buildings just naturally generate it, so they collect that gold. For the English, there's not much to talk about. Their farms are extra efficient. If you build farms underneath your mill, then you can gather food from them faster. And foods, these farms are great because you can build them once and then they just continually generate food. Very cool. Then there's also the French. The French are interesting because all of these economic upgrades, like double broadaxe, specialized pick, survival techniques, that professional scouts technology that we got, those are all cheaper. So they come at a slight discount. Then there's the Abbasid dynasty and the Delhi Sultanate. Those civilizations have increased berry capacity, so their villagers are really efficient at gathering from these berry bushes. And when you put a mill near the berry bushes, if you are the Abbasid or the Delhi, it actually boosts the amount of food that are in these bushes. So it suddenly, the bush becomes a lot plumper. It gets 100 extra food added to it. There's the Rus. The Rus actually get an increased gathering rate when they hunt enough animals, so all of their villagers will be a bit more efficient the more animals you hunt. The Abbasid actually, the Abbasid dynasty, they also get a bonus to their food if you build enough buildings. If you build enough buildings, your villagers will gather food faster. In fact, they actually gather up all resources faster. The Delhi Sultanate, yeah, they also have that berry bush bonus. They can actually research all these technologies for free. It just takes a long time to do so. And then finally, I know I'm missing some Civ. We talked about the Chinese, the English, the French, the Holy Roman Empire, the Rus, the Abbasid. We talked about Delhi. I'm sure I'm missing another, but Those are just some examples of how you can increase the efficiency of your villagers and create just a stronger economy than your opponent. Here I am trying to destroy the computer with all of my infantry and horsemen. We'll talk about army compositions and military and micro elements of the game in the next video, but I figured I would focus on the macro elements. You can see I'm trying to gather up more food and gold to produce units. I now have a decent amount of military production buildings, and so we're just going to start producing as much military as we can to put the final nail in the coffin for this computer player. Looks like we're probably going to need some rams, so we'll probably start to build those shortly. Because villagers are the end-all be-all, well, almost, of your economy, killing your opponent's villagers is incredibly vital. If you're both continually producing villagers from one town center, and all things being equal, if you kill one of his villagers, you will always be up one villager on them. It's an important consideration. Every villager kill is crucial, and if you find yourself getting a few villager kills early on in a game versus an opponent, and they don't get a few of your villagers as well, you're ahead. You're in all likelihood very ahead. Looks like down here we're killing the boar to start gathering food from it. Those boars are nasty, they'll fight back. And another economic element, another way of getting resources are from these relics, these sort of golden, shiny objects that are scattered across the map. If you gather these up and put them into your monasteries or your religious structure using your religious unit, so for the Holy Roman Empire that would be my prelate, he comes by, he picks up one of these relics, he brings it back to the monastery. As long as it's in the monastery, it's going to start generating gold for you, which is cool. Same with these sacred sites. If you use a religious unit to capture this, it'll start to generate gold for you. So there's a wide variety of ways of getting gold on the map. In kind of a grander scheme, what about long games, really extended games? What does the economic game look like in that sense? Well, food is fairly easy to gather in the late game. You will have likely made a lot of farms by then, and these farms just continually generate food. They'll continue to generate food infinitely as long as a villager is gathering from them. So food is a resource that never goes away. It's always around, even in the late game, and you're likely going to be able to produce tons of it. Wood is a little bit more limited. There's only so many trees on the map. There's these nice large clumps of trees, these forests. There might even be these little scraggly trees that are in smaller clumps, and there's even these stealth forests which have barely any trees. And of course there's even just single solitary trees out on the map. Once all this wood is chopped down, it does not come back. Wood is limited. As for gold, gold is technically infinite as well. Your traders, which travel back and forth from the market to the trade post, will infinitely generate gold. You can also get an infinite amount of gold from those relics that are in your monastery or your churches. So these will continue to generate gold. Same with these sacred sites, they will continually generate gold. But the easiest way to get gold is from these gold veins, and these are limited on the map. So gold will trickle in, and it's important at the end game to have not only relics and sacred sites, but to also start to make these caravans, or these traders, which will go back and forth and generate more gold for you. So gold is infinite, just like food, but it can be very difficult towards the end game to get once it has all been mined off the map. And finally, stone is a limited resource, much like wood. Once we've mined it all off the map, it's gone. Though, as always, you can use your market to trade gold for any of the resources. So while it's inefficient, you could technically get any resource you want from the market late game. Hopefully that has explained some of the economic elements of the game, and I hope you understand a bit more about the macro of the game, why I'm gathering resources and how I'm gathering them. Hope to see you for the next sort of tutorial video, and catch you next time.